Hello, this is episode 51 of the Following Mechanical Turks project. And recently what we've been doing is collecting data by posting hits to Amazon Mechanical Turk, hits that ask respondents to originally compose, and then in the second round, rank summaries of 4 different types of content. So we've got a video clip, an audio clip, a still image, and a paragraph of text, all based on the same scenario. And we originally had folks write 1-sentence summaries of those and then provide evaluations of the clarity of that task and then the fairness of compensation, both of which are pertinent to questions of readability in terms of the hit itself, right? Clarity is obviously an aspect of the composition of the hit. And compensation also, as we learned in the first product, is understandably an aspect of making the task feasible as well.
Right.
Then in the second round, we had folks take the summaries that were composed in the first round and essentially rank those, although they did it in sort of a piecemeal fashion because we couldn't have them rank all of the summaries. It wouldn't, it would be a messy task to try and rank 50 1-sentence summaries of something 1 to 50 or something like that.
Right.
And then we asked them the same questions of clarity and fairness. In that second round, we also divided that into whether the task was exclusive to people who had a greater than 98% acceptance rate and more than 5,000 hits completed, or if it was just open. And in the first round, we actually had a lot of different permutations of different instructional language and compensation rate and bonus availability. So now all of that is in. And I've collated it together, although I haven't analyzed it yet. So let me just really quickly share that here.
Yeah.
Okay. And so this is also posted here on the site. This is, since it's aggregate data, this is posted here, responses to hits round 1 and responses to hits round 2. This is what it looks like, when I'm logged in. So you can see in the first round here, we've got the 4 different media types. Just to pull up an example here, it's audio. So what I've done here is these are the different permutations of which, what's that?
I was just, I like the color coding.
It's just to separate them.
Yeah.
And there should be 10, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 5 answers a piece. And you can see the different permutations. Some of this you have to know a little bit about the context to decipher them, right? But task instructions, these will all be audio clip 100. That means the instructional language that keyed on the task you were doing for the audio clip at a compensation rate there of $1, right?
Okay. Yeah.
The same thing, $1.50, $2, task instructions, audio clip bonus. This is if it was the bonus permutation, which is where you were paid $1 flat, but had the opportunity to get a bonus of up to $3 based on how your submission was ranked in the second round. However, as we've discussed, because the time for your submission until the rankings occurred was a few weeks, it was, in Mechanical Turk terms, kind of inordinately long. So
right.
After a couple of weeks, I just granted everybody the full bonus because, and I have no problem with doing that, because the incentive was the possibility of a bonus from 1 to 3, right? I mean, that's right. It doesn't really matter what you actually get, because at that point, the deed is done, right? The
Right,
test,
right.
if you're promised a sort of scaled bonus, would the results be quote unquote better?
Yeah,
Right. So, I mean, that's really just sort of a back end procedural matter that everybody just got the full bonus anyway, because I didn't want them to have to wait for several weeks.
yeah,
I just didn't feel like it was super. Well, I mean, it's not an ethical violation. It's just a community sort of violation. Where it's like, I don't want
yeah,
you to
yeah.
do this. Particularly
Just don't
because,
want to leave, don't want to leave them hanging.
well, and particularly, I mean, as we've learned more about through both products, you know, part of this also is reputational. And this is something that I'm not sure how we could necessarily explicitly work this into the second product, although potentially we could. So what I mean to say is we posted a lot of jobs, and Turkers do track that kind of thing collectively even. So it's like, hey, here's a requester who's asking something that is compensated appropriately. So, you know, if this, because, you know, we have an ID just as workers do.
Right.
So if something else comes out from this requester, it's something you might follow up with or whatever. Individuals also will track that. I know this because MTurk tells you how many of your hits a worker ID has done.
Huh.
Yeah, it'll actually tell you. And so I could see, although
Our fans.
well, yeah, workers who like, oh, this seemed like a good, a well-paying job, and, you know, didn't take a lot of time. So I'm just gonna make sure if this requester releases another thing, I'll jump on it. So you
Right.
can see that. Now, technically, we did not collect that data because it wasn't in the IRB purview to track individual workers like that.
Right.
So I don't think it's anything really we could discuss, but it is something that is relevant, is like reputation. Reputation does matter, as we've seen.
Yeah.
So if you're a requester who has wronged people, it's gonna dissuade them from participating, and they potentially could share that information with other Turkers through third-party services. So all that is,
That would add, I mean, I'm just thinking down the road for the third product. I mean, we wouldn't need the data, but just the idea that, I mean, it occurs if we're thinking about the kind of larger cultural technique, right? That what constitutes human intelligence? It's whether or not the person who wants your human intelligence is worth it. And if they aren't, then I'm not going to produce it. Right? You don't get a hit from me. I mean, the idea that reputation factors into
yeah,
the emergence of human intelligence is worth noting, but probably maybe down the road.
and it suggests, right? I mean, what reputation suggests is that it's collective.
Yeah.
Right. And for reputation to matter, there has to be more than one actor, right?
Right.
Because otherwise, your reputation, if we were unified, wouldn't be a thing. There has to be someone to receive and grade that reputation.
Yeah, and
So,
a technique for, I mean,
yeah,
a system for managing that
right.
reputation.
And potentially that kind of thing is, as we've read about, more than done research into. There is research on, in fact, like the Being a Turker piece and others that are related, that are about like the third party systems that are for Turkers, you know, that where Turkers can collect to discuss requesters and that kind of thing. Anywho, so all that is to say, you know, you do have to kind of keep in mind your responsibility as a requester to the collective. And part of that also, and this is again something we've read about in works like Being a Turker, which was a scholarly piece. I've got it somewhere here. Rather than opening, it wants me to change the name. Okay, there.
Yeah.
So this is it. You can see there's actually a conference paper. I'm not sure if this was ever advanced or if this just came from conference proceedings, whatever. Point is, this and work like it points to this notion of your responsibility. Everybody has responsibilities to the whole, right? And so one of the things that a requester does is be responsive to things like questions or suggestions, even, right? If you're commented about, hey, this isn't working for particular reasons, being responsive to questions and suggestions is perhaps part of your responsibility. That did come up in our second round, where, in part because we were dealing with so many more people, like I did get a couple of contacts that did things like had completed the hit, but because of the way it was set up through Qualtrics, it presumably just made an error, closed the window before they could submit the completion code, because everyone was given a randomized completion code just so that we know they actually did it, rather than we're just in Turk just hitting yes, I did it, right? We had to put a completion code blank in there that Qualtrics gave them, just so we could match, oh, okay, yes, somebody did it. We didn't see who or anything, but we just needed to match it up for compensation purposes, really. Anywho, it's taking too long. This other one that says qualifications, this is the batch that was reserved for Turkers who had, as I mentioned already, greater than 98% acceptance rate and over 5,000, both of which sound very high, but aren't really that high in context. So those are the 5 sort of permutations. Then it does the same thing for different instructional language, keyed on the time it takes. And in doing this also, I noticed that that language, here's how long it's going to take you, probably wasn't accurate. It was probably a little sort of a low ball on our part, because understandably it's like, well, here's how long it took me to do it, but then also, I know what's being asked. So it's like, of course.
Right. The idea that I just read the instructions once and did it, some people maybe had to, And
then there are other complications, like, as you can actually see, some people clearly opened it and then were doing other things and came back.
Yeah.
It'll tell you it's like took this long to do. And these tasks had a hard 30-minute deadline. Like if you don't do it in 30 minutes, it knocks you out, basically.
Yeah.
And the reason why that's there, one of the reasons why that's there is so someone couldn't accept a hit and then just not, just wander away. Do it, and then that hit is incomplete, right? I mean, because other people can't do it while it's essentially in the queue for somebody else, So there are those 30-minute deadlines, but you could tell. I mean, like some people 20 max, and I can say that with confidence because it. Oh shoot!
Yeah, I like the number of people who were saying you paid too much.
Yeah, right. Well, because we did ask, like, is this a fair compensation? And there were, perhaps unsurprisingly, people who were honest in the sense of saying, yeah, I mean, for this kind of work, this is probably overly.
Yeah.
But I'm completely fine with that. Some of them actually were even like a little sort of touching, where it's like, yeah, thank you very much, because often the pay for this kind of stuff is not appropriate at all. It's way too.
Wow.
And you can also see some interesting splits, and we can see this in the numbers when we look at the second round here, where like the ones who are experienced, who have those qualifications, are almost always in the mean, saying this task is more clear and more fair than just throwing it open. Curiously, when the doors are just wide open, people are a little more like, no, this isn't fair pay. And it's interesting because you might implicitly think the converse, where it's like, well, people who are experienced would value their own labor a lot more and say, well, no, my time is more valuable,
Right.
But it's not. I mean, it's like those people tend to have a more fine-grained understanding of pay on the platform. And they're like, yes, I've seen obviously over 5,000 of these.
Right.
So I know sort of like what, fair is contextual, where it's like, well, fair to the platform, maybe not fair in terms of like the broader world, but fair in terms of like, yeah, this kind of work I've seen literally hundreds of times before, and usually it's at a lower rate. Whereas when the door are wide open, you just see people who are like, no, give me more. And it's like, it's weird,
Yeah. Well, I mean, you imagine too, it sort of makes sense that that's the case, because you could imagine someone doing a hit for the first time, and it finally dawns on them that they're getting a nickel for them. And they go, yeah, this is patently unfair. And you can imagine a request with qualifications going, yeah, welcome to M Turk.
Right. Yeah.
Like they're grizzled veterans. Like, yeah, no, this is already, it's that whole, that's what's so interesting about that being a Turker piece, is how quickly Turkers internalize the weird labor market that's at play here, and then end up being defenders of it.
Right. Well, and it's probably true about a lot of things where, humans tend to pick up rules pretty quickly. And then, once they're paradigmatic, it's like, yeah, but that's how things are.
Right.
As you say, to those things becoming naturalized such that, as we see in the discourse about things like, student loan forgiveness, where there's almost a sort of punitive aspect of, well, I paid, everybody else should have to. It's like, that's an unusual internalization of exploitation. It's like,
yeah. Oh, it's disheartening on many levels.
But common, right? Where it's
yes.
like, well, I suffered. We're both academics. Academia is pervaded by a notion of, well, grad school was hard for me, therefore I should revisit trauma on others. Right? Now it's strange.
That's my whole mentoring style.
Right. It's hard for me. It should be hard for you. It should be undoable.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, there's also things mixed in where you can see here, where you see like kind of aberrant ratings. And when you look at them, here's a 1. So this is the lowest possible rating of clarity. But look at this response. This is just copy and pasted from the prompt.
Yeah.
Right? Or our old friend, nice. Right?
Yep.
1 rating, good. 2. These are obviously just.
I would have
a bot or someone just smashing the keyboard with their palm.
I would have loved if they'd have done a different one for the third one. Nice.
Yeah, good, thoughtful.
Great. If it had been like nice, good, great, I'd been like, okay, at least they're mixing it up each time.
Or no, it's like nice, good, and then this last one is, well, when you think about
it. Right. That's when they get really. It's like 3 paragraphs.
Yeah.
What is fair, really? Well, Kant describes it. Yeah.
So anyway, that's how these are broken down. And you can see down in the pages, right? This is the aggregate where I've basically just put them together. And this is their textual response for the summary. This is their rating of clarity, and then their 1-sentence explanation. Because you remember in the first round, not only did you rate it, but you gave us a sentence that said, here's why I think that.
Right.
And the reason why we do that in the first round is because it's feasible. Like this is all of them for audio, right? And there's 50 of them. Yeah. So reading 50 explanations here is feasible. It wasn't feasible in round 2 because we're talking about, what was it? Thousands? I can't remember. I'll see.
Yeah.
So that's how this works. And here's the rating of fairness and then the explanation of fairness. Down here we have, this is like the raw data.
Hey, real quick, can you go back?
This?
To that? Yeah. It was really, I was noticing that, it's back. Right, the whole notion of readability. And then the ones that are getting at like the fairness of the task or the clarity of the instructions, it looks like a fair amount of them are getting at the quality of the audio clip.
Yes, I know.
Which is interesting because you could imagine someone understanding that the bad audio quality is part of the question of readability, but then in their own assessment of the task, remarking about the quality of the audio in talking about the compensation for the task reveal something about what they thought the expectations for the task was.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, because you'll see qualifications like, that express, I couldn't quite make out the words, so I hope my compensation isn't based on that, which, it explicitly says is not,
Yeah.
But yeah, there's a certain reticence to believe that, or maybe they didn't read it fully because who has the time, right?
Yeah.
Although it's not like it was long, but it's still, we're talking about seconds and minutes here.
But a kind of, right, a reticence, the idea that potentially we don't know how bad the audio quality is, and then we won't like their answers.
Right.
Yeah.
And, additionally, it's like a lot of the reason why this, if it weren't us, would be posted here is precisely because it's unclear, right? It's like,
right. Yeah,
if I could hear it, I wouldn't need you to do this. There's
right.
There's a certain level of, that's why it's just, that piece that that we talked about last time, that was about why captchas are depressing. And it's like, well, yeah, the images they're using look grainy and shitty precisely because that's what, it's like, they're the ones that they're struggling with. That's why they look terrible. If it was clear, it wouldn't be here,
Yes, if this was a clear, aesthetically pleasing image, I would just do it myself.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah. There's, again, it's like there's all kinds of interesting potential narratives that can come out of this. But just the thing itself, like this is the aggregate, and these other pages here are just, this is where the aggregate comes from. So like this is that first one, and you can see this is like the raw data. I've obviously cut out things because we can't share everything publicly, but that's what these other things are. You really only need to look at the aggregate, but this is just, for vetting purposes.
Yeah.
So that's the gist of this. Oh, and also one thing to add to that is that discourse about like, well, I couldn't make it out, only really manifests in the audio clip.
Yeah.
Is a little bit of, it's an interesting one because it is like the hardest one to make out.
Yeah.
You can't see the context.
With the video stripped out, it's, as I think we've discussed before, originally that was the idea, is it would kind of all be this, like the still would be from the video, the audio would be from the video. And then I thought for a second, right, should I just re-record this? But then it was just interesting to see the chat, like how readable is this audio if you can't see what's going on, and in which case it becomes harder to hear because you can't see.
Yeah, once you can see, even though that video, there's very little like motion or anything.
No.
But you can see the frame, which is what really seems to be, bearded man, as the descriptions say, bearded man teaching on young son or whatever.
Yes. While rodeo pawn looks on.
Yeah, rodeo pawn, yeah. But yeah, once you can see that, because there, as we see in the audio, there will be like high scoring things that will say like, older man and young woman discuss numbers. And it's like, you could get that sense if you just have the audio, or as we talked about, this weird meta discourse about like young woman asks for cigarette. And I'm like, what? And it's like, because they're talking about 18 and you
18.
May assume that's an age rather than the answer to a math problem.
Yeah. And not voting, but cigarettes.
Yeah. Why default to that? I don't know.
But again, that whole notion
here
of readability. Yeah.
Oh, shoot. Internet connection keeps saying it's unstable, which is odd. I have fiber. Anywho, so round 2 here, here's what it looks like. So what's going on here is this is the aggregate of both the, when we did voting, we broke it into whether they have those qualifications or not. And you can see those are the 2 things down here. This is the aggregate. So this is both of them together. What you're looking at here is this is the ranking of the 50 summaries that were forwarded in round one.
Yeah.
And this is the aggregate ranking of them. So a lower number is better. I mean, you can see here in the aggregate, so both groups, the top scoring one is a man is helping a young girl with a math problem, which for us we would say that's not accurate because it's a boy.
Yeah.
But collectively, you know, this is, and here we have a child and man.
Yeah.
Are talking, and although much of what is said is unclear, and that's something we've pointed out before, this sort of meta commentary.
Right.
They refer to the number 18 in a way that suggests they're discussing a math problem. Right? This notion of talking through versus summarizing.
Right. Yeah, just description versus summary.
Mm-hmm. So this is the aggregate, and you can see, so there's some interesting things to see here in terms of like, this is the lowest score, well, therefore highest scoring, best ranking one. And you can see it's 1.8 there, the lowest down here. And you can see there's a certain sort of intuitive break. It's like, well, yeah, these are the ones that probably should be scoring lowest. Nice. This is very clear, this audio, right? I mean, these are not good summaries. Some blurry voice don't clear. Perhaps a pirate. There's a lot of extra R's. Right, so it's like, oh, okay, this makes sense. Those are down there. These are ratings, aggregate ratings of fairness and clarity, right? The random completion code doesn't need to be in here. It's really just for proof. So what each column here is some Turker's response. That's what we're seeing, right? That's how to read this, is each one of these columns is some anonymous Turker. Then this other stuff is the aggregate. If you break it here, it's the same. It looks the same. If we go to audio qualifications and open,
yeah,
it looks basically the same, but it gives you the ability to do a little bit of interesting comparison there. Like, look, so they're top scoring one, people with qualifications. It's 1.7, so it scores higher, right? And it's this, right? A man is teaching a student something and she is telling him that it can't be 18 and he is agreeing with it, right? So these are the people who are much more experienced. This is what they think it is. And also you'll see their ratings of clarity and fairness, right? So like this, it's 3.2. In the aggregate, it's 3.17, right? So what that tells us is, and in this case, higher is better because the ranking is completely unclear, you know, somewhat clear, or somewhat unclear, somewhat clear, and then completely clear. So higher is actually better in this. And so we can see that phenomenon we just discussed, where it's like they rate it slightly higher if you're experienced than the aggregate, right? Which means, of course, that in the open, it's got to be lower than the aggregate because those two are just an average, right? So they have 3.14. Experienced people have 3.2, right? So they see this as a lot more clear. Fairity, they have 3.48. They have 3.3, right? So they say this is not as good as for compensation, right? So as we talked about last time, it's like, it's kind of neat to potentially, we could even just draw, you know, a line diagram of here's the aggregate, and then here are lines to here's how the rankings were. It is sort of interesting to see the differences in if it's, you know, wide open versus qualifications.
Yeah.
But that's what these show, is the two different halves here. And you can see, I think there were, gosh, I can't even remember how many of these there were. 250, I think, for each one of them. So 250 here, 250 here. That means 500 for each media type. I believe that's how many we did. Which means each one of the options here is shown. What is it, 20 times? Yeah, because 20 times there's 4 a piece. Yeah, I think that's the math. Anywho, so that's the gist of the data. And as I said, like looking at the aggregates in round two, it kind of in particularly at the low end, the narrative is kind of clear there. It's like, oh yeah, the ones I would see as bad do indeed score low. It's like there's a certain sort of comfort to that where it's like, oh, okay. Because the upper end, it's I think the ones there are better, but it's like it's a little bit harder, I think, to say, oh well, this is the perfect summary. Do you know what I mean? Because it's like there are lots in there that seem like, yeah, depending on what you're picking up here, this is good,
Right.
It's kind of easier to spot one that's garbage because it's just someone shouting good, or it's copy and pasted from the question itself. It's easier to say, yeah, that's garbage. Then, I mean, there are lots of legitimate one-sentence summaries of these things. So,
yeah. Too, it's interesting to think, as we talked about a little bit last time, the preference for the ones that sort of summarize the scene, whereas the ones that do a really good job, but they're not. If we were in fact interested in summaries of the scene, then some of the good ones that also point out, from what I can hear, this is happening, right? Those aren't usable, because we don't need a description of the audio. We need a summary of what's happening in the scene. And so in that way, right, from what I can hear, it sounds like this is happening is as good as the guy that just yells good, because neither could be used as right. What's interesting then is even the ones that are low, depending on what we saw as the use of this summary.
Yeah.
Some of the really detailed ones are like, yeah, but we don't need the summary. I need to know what's going on in the scene. So all this language about the audio quality is And
when there's a sense in which, as you say, it's like, if we envision this as like a caption or something, you can't imagine a caption that says, well, from what I can hear, this is like, imagine a textbook that says, well, I can't really make out the image, but it looks, it's like, that's what we need is we need a summary of this. We don't need a description of your meta commentary. The intrusion of the personal in that, where it says like, well, from what I can make out, it's like, no, this is supposed to be a neutral description of the thing,
Right. Yeah.
But I mean, that's a question of interpretate. I mean, it's a question of the readability of the prompt.
Yeah.
Where it's like, if we said maybe something like, provide a caption for this image,
right,
people may see that differently than give me a summary of this.
What's the word caption do in terms of rendering the task for a Turker?
Or something like that, I mean, that's the other thing, is it's like, there are lots of things that could, because like, if you wanted to parse the question of readability versus accuracy, that's something that came up, and we discussed this initially. Like, should we parse, readability from some of its peers that came up in the first thing, like accuracy, because
we were going to have a much bigger schema of this same instruction, but don't use accuracy. This same instruction, but use, I forget, we had a series of,
there were like 3 or 4 of those.
Yeah.
It's, and it's a potential avenue for hypothetical future research, because, for example, the one that just says good is in a sense very readable. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it's not accurate.
No.
And yet people still didn't rank it very high in terms of readability. So there's an implicit understanding of, when I say readability, I mean the letter A is readable. I can see it pretty clearly. I know what it means, but
I got no problems with the word nice. It's all caps. It's very, it's
So there's an interesting sense in which that notion of readable as mechanical deciphering of text, we understand that's not all there is to it. It's like, it has to be also, semantically valid,
which is interesting too, because those ones that are descriptions, where the person is in it, right, is someone though that is pointing out that the mechanics of readability are important, right? There's an interesting way in which the good is on a similar, I lost the thread there, but right, but the ones that then don't just summarize the scene, but feel the need to remark on the legibility of the audio,
right, yeah,
are marking that it's that the mechanical legibility of it is important.
And I mean, like, that was what the second in the aggregate, the second best, right? What did that sort of meta commentary. So I think the discussion we're having now is what the second paper is, right? Where it's like, here's the results. And so what we need to do is unpack what readability is in these ways, right? Where we can see from these results, people kind of straddling the notion of, semantic import, but mechanical legibility, for lack of a better, I mean, I don't know what you call legibility in audio, right? Where it's like, do you know what I mean? Where it's like, I can hear and understand what those things, I don't know what the term for legibility in audio is. There probably is one.
We'll find it.
Yeah.
We'll fix it in post.
Yeah. But I mean, I think that's maybe what the second paper is like looking at these things and trying to articulate what's going on in terms of readability.
Yeah. And just, I mean, thinking to it, I think that makes a lot of sense for the second one. I think that'll be really interesting. And I think there's ways in which that starts moving us towards the third piece too, right? How then is readability getting the concept of readability emerging from this culture, this cultural technique of mechanical Turks?
Well, and there's a sense in which maybe, because I think we were kind of talking about this last time, there's a way to, in a discussion, kind of attach this into notions of the human as readable thing, right? That may lead toward the third paper where we're theoretically talking about the Turk theorizing what a human is, and part of that is sort of this collective notion of making the self of, as we said in the first piece, telling, right? Making the self visible to sort of higher orders of complexity. I don't know, we'll have to be probably a little careful in the second piece about how far it spins off theoretically, which tends to be kind of a danger for us.
Yes.
But, I mean, it's something to consider. I don't know.
Yeah, because I mean, what's really interesting too is that Turker that does the, from what I can hear, that strikes me as a particularly interesting way to start the third piece. Because it's in fact, right, that the language of that summary is already like, I know that I'm the thing being read. Mm-hmm. And I feel compelled to tell you what is informing, right? It's you could read, I don't mean, this is probably not the right word, but right, it's defensive in a way. Or right? I understand I'm being asked, I'm being read, and I'm letting you know, here's something that's potentially going to influence my own readability.
It's potentially signaling like its own diagnostic notion of accuracy, where it's like, here's my level of confidence about what I'm about.
Right. Yeah.
Which you don't necessarily get from other kinds of sensors is a metacognition about my level of certainty here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's sort of the comic, right? I mean, the sort of the Star Wars, the Star Wars droid, C-3PO, and then the one from Rogue One, like that, a constant sort of comedic refrain is they're constantly giving you the odds.
Right. Yeah.
But those odds are kind of like their own metacognitive, I think that it's the robot that's sort of actually attending to its own confidence levels.
Yeah.
Which is how the movie solves the problem of how do I make this robot something that an audience will identify with? I basically give them metacognition.
Yeah, and they're sort of Yeah, and they have interesting. I mean, this won't come up in the paper probably, but they have
Oh,
right because we associate the sort of cowardice with C3PO, where it's like, the odds of success are a billion, and he's like,
yeah,
he's freaked out about this, even though he's a robot, and
right.
has been, literally disassembled at different points. Whereas in Rogue One, there's a certain sort of sardonic, well, you're
That's
all
true.
die from this,
No, you're right. It's not, yeah, they're very different. One is actually much more taunting. Like, yeah, no, I don't, that's fine.
That comes up in The Mandalorian as well. This seems to be a refrain
Yeah.
of the sort of the stance of artificial intelligence.
Well, and the Mandalorian seems to be the one that fully, I mean, seems to more fully confront it insofar as the Mandalorian actually has like an explicit bias against, where they actually make the fact there are robots in this world seems to somehow really click in the Mandalorian.
Well, and there's the one robot's sort of Terminator 2-esque journey from event from initial foe, sort of foe, to
Right.
later friend or tool or whatever. Anyway, we're probably
Anyway,
a little far afield here.
yeah.
um
Yeah, pop culture association panel we're not going to do.
I'm not traveling. Have you started school yet? Started teaching?
Yeah, yes, Wednesday, and then I'm today again at 11.
Are you in person?
Yep, but everybody has to be vaccinated and wear masks.
We have the mask mandate, and we don't mandate vaccines, but as I think I mentioned, we're sidestepping it by saying everybody has to do weekly testing, but you can opt out if you've been vaccinated.
Yeah,
That said, our numbers are blasting right through the roof, as I suspect is going to be the case for a lot of institutions.
yeah,
There's already sort of scrambling about, should we go online for a few weeks and then maybe
yep,
this is all going to blow over, which is, there's like
yeah.
that Atlantic where it's like, during the summer, the die was already sort of cast and there's no real like plan B. Like even the public schools here, it's like, no, there is no online option anymore. So get in there.
Yep, yep. So I think so far so good. I mean, I think the vaccination requirement was,
Yeah.
I think even with medical exemptions, I think it's like 98% of the student body is vaccinated. So
yeah, and I'm, oddly enough, I'm not overly panicked for myself, but like, well, as you, I mean, we both have kids that can't be vaccinated yet, which is sort of the main concern is.
yeah, I got one vaxxed and one unvaxxed.
Right. And even though my daughter's school does require masks, but it's cropping up in children more frequently now.
Yep. Yep. And what I think potentially larger portions of the public are on the hook for this, but the idea of death as being the criteria we've used.
Right.
Is like there are lots of other things that could happen to you that are terrible that don't kill you.
And
so the idea that we simply measure COVID's impact by the number of people that it's killed,
right,
is like, yeah, but I mean, I still because I think maybe my spouse had it because I explicitly lost her sense of smell and taste.
Yeah.
And that means that it's doing something to you neurologically. I mean, that as a symptom freaked me out. Like you don't lose it because you're stopped up. You lose it because it just turns off. I mean, yeah. Anyway.
Well, and more, and we have no idea what the potential long-term, it's like, oh, I got over COVID. Who knows if in 20 years we see a wave of like mysterious strokes that blood clots, it's clearly attacking your vascular system. It's like, we have no idea what the potential, when you say you got over it, it's like, we don't know.
Yeah.
Know that.
Mostly things that don't kill you do not in fact make you stronger.
Oh, yeah. This is for off camera, but I had we were doing, because we couldn't do graduation. So we were all doing like personal messages to students.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was, I recorded this one bit that was about why that's inaccurate, why it's like the notion of what doesn't kill you makes you stronger is demonstrably false. Often it makes you considerably weaker, but also the notion of confronting this through strength is absurd, right? It can make you smarter. It can make you more crafty. And then after I record this, I was like, oh, I can't fucking post this. What am I talking about? I can't.
Oh, the idea of a pre-recorded personal message seems so much up your alley.
Yeah. Well, and after that one, after I finished, I was like, I can't dissect that phrase while people are literally dying of a pandemic. I was like, this.
But can you send me that?
I probably have it somewhere.
Yeah, no, like if you break your leg, you are more likely to break that leg. That's just, your leg is not now stronger. It's got a crack in it.
Yeah. Ask people who've had a heart attack and survived it. That toughen you up, did it?
Yep. Yeah. You
stronger now?
Listen, that I had a heart attack. It didn't kill me. The next day I went out and ran a marathon in 2.5 hours.
Anywho.
Yeah.
What we should probably do going forward with this, because you gotta cut out, is I'm gonna be taking a look at that data, and it's also you have access to it as well, so we can look at the data and see what to make of it. Also, we have notes about sort of like how to frame this in terms of academic conversations, right? I mean, sort of like the actual context.
Yeah.
We didn't resolve it, but we have notes about like, should this go in the line of, as I was talking about in that conference talk, notions of like literacy, right? Moving from orality to literacy to digitality, and we don't have a notion of what the unit is in digitality the way we do in orality and literacy. Is it in this conversation, or is it in other conversations of readability? I mean, that's something to resolve, is like,
yeah,
what is the context in which this goes? As I said, we're not starting from scratch there, but it's something to resolve, because we also talked about other things like the seeing as a state piece, and I think it's the way there's an online piece that talks about the book Seeing as a State, and it has this kind of interesting notion of applying that to the algorithm,
right?
So, seeing like an algorithm, which dovetails with the CAPTCHA stuff that we just talked about.
Yeah, that is interesting. And I mean, I think too, I think maybe what's helpful too is as you were just talking about, I mean, the conversation we've had today, particularly about those results, and right, the movement from just the summaries to good, which is readable, but clearly not, even from the Turkers, not what they took readability to be, that could be, I think, and then how we want to frame that. Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, that's something we'll want to do, is think about what scholarly conversation is this going to be in, and then can start thinking about also guests, right? Which is something we touched upon previously. We haven't had a guest in a while because mostly we've been doing this stuff.
Yeah.
But if we can think of folks, particularly those conversations go hand in hand, because it's like, if we can find scholarly work, we can potentially talk to those people and be like, hey, we're seeing this. Do you see these notions of readability or literacy or legibility or whatever in your work?
Yeah.
Touching upon this or whatever. So,
I think you're right. Those are the same. They're not the same task, but they're very like in figuring out what conversation we want this second piece to be a part of. We will. Those should be the people we talk to.
Yeah, can we talk to those folks, as we did with the first one? A lot of those folks we were able to talk to.
Yeah. Okay.
So that's kind of the big things, I guess.
Yeah, that's the plan.
All right. Anything else right now?
That's it.
All right. Well, I will talk to you in a fortnight.
All right. See ya.
Yeah, take it easy.